Okay, let's get started. Good morning and welcome back. I hope that you had a good weekend. I'm looking forward to getting rolling on this week. This is our last full week of content in the course before we have the midterm exam. So this week we'll be looking at culture and the way that culture impacts our interpersonal communication. So in addition to having the midterm next Wednesday and Friday, which you'll be doing on your own, and we will not have class meetings next Wednesday or Friday. Next Monday's class is a midterm review class. So I encourage you to come in with questions. We'll do kind of a fun game to help you to review for the exam. But if you're feeling confident in your ability to prepare, I do make the midterm review day next Monday, attendance optional. So you can choose based on whether you'd like some additional support and prep, or if you're feeling good and ready to take the exam that next week. So just putting that on your radar. We've got a practice question for today. This is a more general practice question related to the course rather than what we talked about last class specifically. So I encourage you, when you're just looking at this question on your own, to see how confident you feel in your answer. This will give you a good sense of what you should expect to review for. So a blank attachment style is characterized by viewing others positively, but viewing yourself negatively and unworthy of love, either secure, preoccupied, dismissing, or fearful. Take a couple minutes to think about this question, and then we'll talk about it together. That is fancy. Well, we got some extra space for the board if you need it. There's also this corner up here that's easier for you. Okay. Anybody who'd like some more time on this practice question? Okay, let's talk about it. So attachment styles, how many people say A, secure, B, preoccupied, C, dismissing, or D, fearful? Yes, so the correct answer here is B, preoccupied, right? Under a preoccupied attachment style, you're interested in connecting with other people and forming meaningful relationships with other people, right? You love other people, but you don't feel great about yourself. So oftentimes in those relationships, you might be looking for constant reinforcement. Do you still love me? Are you still interested in me? Do you still want to be friends? Am I annoying you? Right? So we might be using verbal and nonverbal signals to help communicate. So if you had a little bit of challenge with this question, there is the 4 jigsaw pieces in the textbook that go over the different attachment styles, and they're scaled based on your self-value and how you value other relationships. So I definitely recommend refreshing on that. Okay, so last Friday's class, we went through a practice short essay question that's an example of what you should expect to see on the midterm exam. I apologize for the confusion regarding it being a single question divided into 3 parts, right? And Zeke brought up, good to know that that is a question now rather than on the exam. So I will make sure to, for clarity, say it's part 1, part 2, part 3 on the midterm exam. We also talked about verbal and nonverbal communication and the ways that those things impact our relationships. So if you did not join us on Friday, you are welcome to still work through that practice question. You can also, if you want feedback from me on your practice question, just send me an email and I'll let you know what grade you would expect to receive. You could also request the same for the 2 practice short essay questions that are available on Canvas to help you prep for the exam. Any questions about anything we talked about last class? Anything in general about the course, midterm, anything else like that? So the midterm is next Wednesday and Friday, right? So the way that that's set up is you have the 3-day window, 72 hours, and you can choose to take it on Canvas anytime within that 3-day window. But once you choose to do so, you've got 2 hours to take it. So the window starts on Wednesday, October 26th, and it will end on, so it'll start like 12:01 a.m. on the 26th, and it will end at 11:59 p.m. on the 28th. So we will not have class meetings on those days so that you can take the exam wherever you would like. The midterm review that's next Monday is attendance optional. You're welcome to attend to review, but you will not be required to do so. Okay. All right. So today we'll be diving into culture, but before we do that, I do want to take a moment to talk about some feedback and general things that I noticed on the Canvas prompts. Now that we're in the 4th week, right, and at least one of the 6 Canvas prompts was required, I had a chance to see them from just about everybody, and I'd like to give some general feedback and trends on what I noticed. So you'll notice that all of the Canvas prompts, including the one that you turned in for last Friday, have grades and feedback. I encourage you, you likely receive a notification that says you have a new submission comment on this assignment. To look through that, read through that feedback, and use that to help you as you're gearing up for the next Canvas prompt. So we'll, once we go through that, be talking about culture, why culture matters, why culture is important, and the ways the culture impacts interpersonal communication. Culture is an area that we'll talk about in this class. However, Dr. Chen teaches a course that's dedicated to the topic called intercultural communication. So if this is an area that you find interesting and want to explore further, that class will get into a lot more of those details. So what I wanted to do here is to go through some examples of responses that people submitted for the Canvas prompt that I thought did a great job of addressing the prompt, and I think exemplify, including all of the parts that were needed to address that question, you know, to highlight what's working well and to offer some feedback to folks for whom maybe the score or the feedback that you received on it was not quite what you wanted. I'll say that, you know, there are a lot of folks who did a great job on the latest Canvas prompt. There are also some folks who had a little bit of a struggle with that one. So I do want to go over some tips and ways to help you to improve as you're going forward. So this first part was generally one that people did a good job of addressing, right? This first part, I was thirsty, so I grabbed some pop from the fridge. I will fully admit when I was creating this sentence, I was not thinking about the other interpretation of thirsty, which a couple of you pointed out in your response. So that's great, right? That points to the ways that different rules of language are constantly changing, right? Our use of slang for words like thirsty constantly changes, and not always is things that we recognize right away, which emphasizes the importance of these rules, right? So this first part of the question was asking you to identify these different rules that help you to understand the sentence. An example, right, of using semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic. Semantic is the dictionary definition, right? So the word thirsty, and using that word to mean that you need a drink, right? You're parched, would be the use of semantic. The use of syntactic, right, is grammar structure and punctuation, to use the comma in that sentence. And then the use of pragmatic, right, the use of culture and context. So the explanation that pop, right, and soda pop is something that we use culturally to understand and define carbonated beverage. All get at those 3 different rules. So I thought this response did a great job of highlighting each of those 3 rules, explaining the relevance to the sentence. So part 2, right? So part 2 was asking you to identify different categories of nonverbal communication, right? And what was noticed in that video. I enjoyed people kind of responding and engaging with that video. Again, I think it's incredibly interesting, right? Because the film WALL-E, the entire like first 45 minutes of the movie, there is no spoken word dialogue aside from a show on the TV, right? Like that WALL-E has in his little shed. So it's really kind of cool to see how much we can learn just through nonverbal communication. So A lot of the categories that people identified were really good. For instance, this response, right, talks about vocalics using the voice, kinesics using the body movement, oculesics using the eyes, right, to communicate, explaining how things such as pitch, volume, kinesics, gesturing and moving your body around, like freaking out, that the tape is being pulled apart, like those details like that were highlighted really well in this example, and I think showed good response to this part of the prompt. The third part of the prompt was the area where there was the most difficulty. There were a couple issues here that a few folks had, right? First of all, remember that a function of nonverbal communication, right, is a reason that we use nonverbal communication. Kinesics is not a function of nonverbal communication, right? Oculesics is not a function of nonverbal communication. Complementing, contradicting, substituting, those are functions, right? A function of nonverbal communication is a situation in which we use nonverbal communication. Another way to think about this is to think about a function as a purpose of nonverbal communication, right? So we talked about these functions and they're in your textbook. If you had some difficulty with this section of the question, I definitely recommend refreshing on these 6 different functions and the ways that those can be used, right? So I think that identifying the use of contradicting, right, going against the original message is being used well here, right? Shaking his hands to indicate that he wants to stop, but then clapping to indicate that you did a good job, right? It goes against what that message is trying to convey is. So that's a good example here of using contradicting. The other area where people struggled a little bit on this one was the inclusion of an APA or MLA site, right? So this part of the prompt did ask you to include a citation in MLA or APA citation format. So I encourage you, if you missed this part of the prompt, just to read through the prompt fully and carefully and make sure that you're integrating that. So this here is an example, right, of the proper use of MLA because it's the last name of the author, no comma, and then followed by page number. If you were doing this in APA, right, you would do rent, comma, 2020, comma, P161 to indicate the page number. So if you are continuing to have some issues with including citations, APA or MLA style, let me know, and I'm happy to help you with that. But just please make sure that you're addressing that part of the prompt because there were a few responses that did not include any of the in-text citations. So I think this is a good example here of that part 3. So as I mentioned, right, go through when you receive submission comment, right? Look back through the feedback on those previous Canvas prompts to let you know, even if you've got a good grade and you're doing a good job, what is going well and you can continue to work on. One thing that I really recommend, right, is I recognize a lot of you are traveling and doing a whole bunch of different things. So I encourage you to look at the week's Canvas prompt as early as possible, for example, on a Monday, so that you know what is being expected and looked at for that week. And then using that to help you as you're working through the readings and your notes to know, okay, I need to understand what culture is. I need to understand the 6 spectrums of defining culture, et cetera, to help you to inform that. And, you know, continue to work on progressing the prompt. Again, I'm happy to look over drafts of your Canvas prompts if you'd like to send them to Curly for feedback and you're a little bit unsure of those. Please make sure to double check your conventions and your sentence structures, right? For instance, one thing that I'm noticing is improper capitalization of proper nouns, right? Proper noun is something like a name, right? Saying James, of course, we want to capitalize. Nonverbal communication is not necessarily a proper noun, so it doesn't need to be capitalized. If you're working, for instance, from your phone or something that autocorrects, there's a good chance that it is capitalizing things incorrectly or correcting things for you that are capitalizing incorrectly. So do double check to make sure that the capitalization scheme makes sense. Also, continue to work on using clauses to separate sentences, including relevant sentences, right? Saying, in this essay, I will argue that communication is important because we do it every day, right? It's a pretty long sentence that's not separated by any clauses. In this essay, comma, right, helps to break out the part of the sentence. I will argue that communication is important, period. We communicate every day. Varying up your sentence length, right, and using those strategies to try to help with the structure of your sentences just makes things easier to read. When in doubt, split up those longer sentences to help to break up your clauses. So just some tips I noticed. Again, a lot of people did a great job, but I do want to help and support people who did not get the grades on those that they wanted or hoped for, and just make sure that we are on the same page about some of those concepts and ideas, especially since aspects of verbal and nonverbal communication will be important things to know as we gear up for the exam. If you have specific questions or concerns about the grade that you received on the Canvas prompt, or want to chat with me further about that, just let me know and I'm happy to schedule a meeting. Any questions on any of this? We have another Canvas prompt for this week. This will be our last Canvas prompt before the exam. So I do encourage you to look through that prompt and get a sense of what we're looking for as we prepare for them. Again, a lot of people are doing great on these, but I think highlighting best practices is a good thing to support you as you're working through this. So today, right, we're getting into the role of culture. And culture is incredibly important because when we talk about the idea that communication is the use of symbols to convey shared meaning, right? This idea is that meaning has to be understood and shared between two different people. If we have differences in how we interpret and understand nonverbal communication, if I'm grading and I say, oh yeah, thirsty has a different meaning that's being used more generationally, right? That's going to affect how we understand and make sense of the world, right? Culture plays a really big role because not only do members of different cultures speak different languages, but members of different cultures understand and engage in the world in different ways. Language and communication shapes reality. We talked earlier in the course about the Piraha, indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest, right, who do not have numbers to describe, or do not have words to describe numbers, right, and interpret and understand, for instance, the number of hooks in a very different way. So culture is not only something that shapes the way that we communicate, that is, we use culture to try to understand one another, right, but culture is also shaping how we understand the world. How many people have ever heard of the myth of, there's a couple different versions, the blind man and the elephant, or the elephant and the cave? Story ring a bell for anybody? Yeah, see, okay. So a couple people may have heard this story, or you might start to hear this story and remember this one, right? So the premise is that there is a group of people who are asked to go inside a pitch black dark cave and to identify and report on what is inside that cave. So what is inside the cave is an elephant. They have no idea that an elephant is there. So they go inside the cave, right? And you have one person who is touching the trunk, right? And they think, oh, this is like a tree, right? It's got the strong, roots, and it seems like it's a tree. Another person is touching the tusks, right? And touching the tusks, they think that it's something like a knife, right? Or a sword. Somebody is touching the tail, and they think that it's a rope, right? The idea of this story is that people who are going in, after they touch the part of the elephant, go out and they start arguing and fighting over each other about what it is that was in there. They say, no, it was a rope, no, it was a sword, no, it was a trunk, right? But in reality, it was an elephant, and they were only touching a part of that elephant. So they only understood a part of the whole experience. And when we're thinking about culture, right, it's in that same vein that us as members of cultures and members of groups who participate in culture oftentimes without even realizing it, right? It's so ingrained into how we think and how we engage in the world that we are touching that part of the elephant, and that is how we assume the world is or how the world works, right? One of the challenges of culture is this idea of ethnocentrism, of our belief that our own culture and lived experience is better than other people's cultures. And we go to ethnocentrism on a couple of bases, one of them being that it's familiar to us and it makes sense to us. Oftentimes as humans, right, we fear that which we feel is unfamiliar to us. But this idea that culture helps us to understand each other, helps us to understand the whole elephant, right? That by understanding and communicating and realizing the ways that different cultures communicate, that we can do a better job of speaking sensitively to and making sure that how we communicate is something that reaches populations. In fact, you look at just about any website that specializes in job hiring, for instance, things like Indeed or Handshake. You look at what are considered to be the most desirable skills for employing people for jobs. And again, in addition to communication and communicating effectively, it's the idea that people are able to collaborate in groups. And it's the idea that people are able to communicate with people from different experiences, cultures, and backgrounds, right? That you are going to be put in a team where you're working with people that have diverse and unique perspectives, or you're working with a group of people that communicate with each other in very different ways, or have ideas that are brought together that one culture doesn't necessarily understand. So culture is important because culture gives us a vocabulary to understand and engage with each other. One really good example of this is when you think about how you're structuring things like meetings, right? What holidays are you accounting for? For instance, there might be people, for instance, who are practicing Judaism and do not attend or not able to attend a meeting because it is a serious religious holiday. So thinking about those elements that shape how we're coming into this world, right, helps us to understand each other a little bit better. And in this way, culture brings about differences in how we choose to communicate with each other and how we think about our own culture, right? There's a good chance when you're asked to think about what your own culture or background is, you might say, oh, well, it's normal or it's default, right? But no culture is normal or default. We come to believe a culture is normal or default because it is the lived experiences that shape us and put us into what our center is, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with having pride or positivity toward your feelings of culture and cultural expression, but understanding that there are other ways of interpreting and engaging with the world is a crucial skill that we can build through communication. So I like the use of sort of comics to help us think about some of these ideas, right? So this comic is saying, Mo now Niner, rip shot, little dinger babe, little dinger, right? If you do not play baseball or you're not familiar with baseball, or even if you know a little bit about baseball, there's a good chance that you probably don't understand the specialized technical language and jargon that's being used here, right? When we become members of groups and members of culture, oftentimes we find ourselves in positions where the language choices and framing just are very unique to us and are things that an outsider would not necessarily understand. How many of you have inside jokes with your friends? Yeah, so a bunch of you, right? Several of you are nodding. So oftentimes we use inside jokes, phrases, expressions, right, as a way of creating that connection and shared meaning, but to an outsider, it totally wouldn't make sense. So the way that we use jargon and specialized language as you're a part of a group or a part of a culture really helps to shape and understand our communication. So culture is a term that has been very, very, very difficult to define, right? What culture is and how we define culture is still an area of contestation and discussion and evolution. I think there are a lot of situations in which culture is being used in a way that doesn't really get at the depth of culture, right? In fact, I think there's a trend of people putting something that they don't like in and then saying blank culture, right? It doesn't really get at the definition or elements of culture. So let's define and think about these elements that help make and shape what culture is, right? And I like the idea of thinking about it like a puzzle with jigsaw pieces, because the idea is that members of a culture are coming together and piecing those things together to make sense. So culture refers to a group of people, right? So culture is not something that somebody individually owns, right? I have my own culture. No, culture is communicated and engaged by groups. So members exist within cultures, not a single member. They, through a process of learning, are able to share, right? So this idea that learning and engagement is a process that members of a culture help to develop over time. If you think of, for instance, about religious affiliation or spiritual affiliation, right? Something such as a baptism, such as going to a service or observation, right? Those are examples of a process of learning. Another really good example of a culture engaging in the process of learning is school, right? And where you went to school, what you learned in school, how you learned about history in school, whose history and what type of history you learn through school. That's that process of learning that's shaping a culture as well, right? We think back to the first week of class, there's the idea of perception, right? Perception is the way that we attend to, organize, and interpret information. So how we perceive, right, the glasses that we wear to try to understand and engage with the world, well, that's happening through the learning process. Berger and Lutman in the social construction of reality argue that we go through the process of primary and secondary socialization. Primary socialization are our immediate family members, those incredibly close to us and early in our development, right? And secondary socialization being going to school and forming those connections with other people, right? And that is the way that perceptions of the world help to develop through learning. We understand the world in a certain way based on how we have been raised and the things that we come to understand about our own existence. And then this influences beliefs, values, norms, and rules, which we'll break down in just a second, that eventually affect our behavior, right? How we communicate with each other, both verbally and non-verbally, well, that's through the process of culture and the ways that we have become members of different cultures and groups. So let's understand some of these elements in a bit more detail, right? So beliefs, assumptions, norms, and rules break down some of the key elements of what makes something a culture. So beliefs are what are known as assumptions or convictions that are held by somebody about the truth or existence of something. So a belief, right, is oftentimes very hard-coded. It is something that somebody sincerely holds and, practices in their daily life. If we think about a lot of major religions, right, these differ in what their core beliefs are, right? Are we waiting for the Messiah? Is Jesus the Messiah? Well, those are things that different religions approach differently. Or what figures or individuals are deemed important to a religion or group? Is there life after death, right? What does that look like? Well, that's something that's going to be a very different answer depending on your own beliefs and your own perspective. So the truth or existence of something is something that beliefs get at. And it's not just religious beliefs, but it can also be in terms of your belief about how members of a group should behave in something like a more individualistic or collectivist culture. But it can also be beliefs about what is important or matters to you. For instance, the idea of personal success or success of a group. Values are what is known as principles or standards that members of a culture have about what we should or should not do. To give you one example, in South Korea, it is customary when you're eating a family dinner for the elders of that group or family to eat first, and that the younger members will eat once the elder of the group has started eating, right? That's the norm, and it deals with this idea of valuing the elders and the contributions of older members of the group. So that would be an example of a value, right? This value of the experiences that older members of a group might bring to the table. So if we think about values, right, there's the Aristotelian sense of thinking about values as between two vices, right? So you're economical, but you're not like cheap and you're not extravagant, right? So sometimes values are seen as in the middle where there's this appropriate way to behave. You can think about values as what should members of a culture do? How should they behave? Culture gets at understanding those elements. Norms. So a good example of norms, right, is there is the very memed image that is, it's when Captain America, Steve Rogers, goes to Wakanda, right, and T'Challa, Black Panther, is there, and Captain America tries to bow, right, and T'Challa like stops him and says, "We don't do that here." That's an example of a norm, right? Saying we don't bow in this context is how folks in fictional world of Wakanda, right, have specific guidelines about what appropriate social behavior looks like. So, for instance, are you expected to eat at the dinner table? That would be an example of a norm that members of a culture have. So norms are things that we learn over time. They're not hard-coded, right? They are things that we develop and learn through our membership. And then we have this idea of rules, right? Rules are generally written down, and they inform what we consider to be the acceptable behavior and actions of members of the group. We think about the U.S. Constitution and we think about the Bill of Rights, right? That would be an example of culture-centered rules. If we think about how a book or text is important for culture of group, oftentimes that has rules and guidelines for behavior, right? If you are signing on for a contract for a new job, that's got rules too. So norms are not written, they're just things we do, right? We don't do that here. Rules are written down. And all of those things together create behavior. They create nonverbal behavior. How are you looking at somebody else? How are you gesturing? How are you engaging with somebody else? How are you sending an email, right? How are you using verbal communication with that other person? That is what happens as the result of this entire process. So I'll give you one example, right? So we have a number of tribes and indigenous groups here in Eastern Oregon. If you have not taken a class with Dr. Jarofsky over in anthropology sociology, she does a lot of work with a lot of the tribes and groups in the area. These populations, right, in these indigenous groups have what we can categorize into beliefs, values, norms, and rules. Beliefs that the Columbia River and the Blue Mountains, right, the surrounding area, are seen as incredibly important for sources of food, sources of meaning, right? They help us to understand our relationship to nature. Values, the strong ties to ancestry and culture, are practices shared by many of these indigenous groups as well. Norms, right? Unwritten rules, the usage of dance, the usage of religious beliefs or practices. And then rules. So many of these indigenous groups in Eastern Oregon and Washington have had challenges because younger generations have not understood or learned the native language. So one thing that many of these indigenous groups have been doing is developing language programs and education in order to support the younger generation in learning the native language, because many of these indigenous groups see the ability to develop language and practice and continue to use the language as incredibly important to their culture and to their identity. That being bilingual or being able to understand the historical significance of the native language is an important way that the legacy and traditions of that culture can be passed on. Wanted to provide a short video that goes into some of that context as well.
To the homeland of the Paiute, Walla Walla people. We have lived on this land for more than 10,000 years. Today, we are the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Reservation. We have the Paiute, Umatilla, and Walla Walla Confederacy here to invite you to come and learn more about our culture. This is our homeland, and it has sustained us for thousands of years, and it has given us reason to celebrate year-round for all of those years. Today, I'd like you to meet members of our tribal community: Elijah, Cassius, Elena, Virginia, Red Sky Senior and Junior, as well as Jeff, who's going to explain to you the importance of this tribal dance that you're about to experience.
Welcome again to the Indian Village at the World Famous Culture Outlet. We've been participating here for 100 years. It's one of the many ways that we practice our culture and our heritage. And the war dance comes from what the men would do before and after they would go to battle, but how they would interpret what they'd experienced in battle.
So the Confederated Tribe, right, is involved, has been active at Pendleton Roundup, right, which is just a little bit west of us every year, right, and does these practices, you know, whether it is doing a dance that is associated with war, with coming of age, with rites of passage, whether it's the clothing and relationship to the land. You can see all four of those things at play in those elements. So what I'd like you to do as your first part of attendance today is to think about a culture that you are personally a member of, based on the definition that we've been talking about and some of the ways that we've been talking about. So think about a culture that you are a part of. What is this culture? and what are some of the beliefs, values, norms, and rules that are present in this culture as well. So take some time to think about this and start to develop your response to this part of the question. Easy way to think about dividing these up is to say, what is true, what is important, what is unstated, what is stated. You have finished this part. What I'd like you to do is to find a partner or group of three and just compare what you've shared and written down regarding your cultures. Things that you notice is similar or maybe is a bit different between the two. So feel free when you're done to reach out to somebody sitting next to you and chat about some of the things that you've noticed.
And then then also just like encouraging people to positive way, but and then
So take a second to finish up here. Notice as you're sharing, right, as you're talking about this, there's a good chance that you consider yourself to be a member of multiple cultures, right? That there's a lot of different groups that come together to shape how you engage, or you might communicate in very different ways depending on the culture that you're a part of. Yes. The rules. Anybody who'd like some additional time here? Okay. So let's chat a little bit about this, right? So I think it's useful for us to understand and learn that, you know, as parts of culture, there are different patterns of communication that come in. In addition to those, we have the idea of a co-culture, right? These are generally smaller and exist within a larger culture. For instance, they might involve smaller cultural groups or influence within a larger group or population. For example, perhaps there is a specific community or district that exists within a city or location. We might think about the ways in which indigenous populations might exist as co-cultures within the city of LeGrand, right? So co-cultures offer and contribute and at times push back against culture, right? And then in addition to that, we have what's known as a microculture, right? So a very small locality, organization, or group. You're going to, for example, if you are a part of a chapter of an organization on campus, you're part of a microculture. So when we might look at a broader culture as something like baseball, well, being on the baseball team here at EOU would be an example of a microculture. That a microculture tends to have much more specificity in its location, its experiences, and so on with other people. So culture is a big circle, right? Co-culture is a smaller circle within that. And a microculture would be an even smaller circle in there that talks about a specific location or physicality in which communication occurs. So cultures can be understood in that context as well. And then we also have this idea of self-esteem and how you value yourself within a culture or group, right? How you evaluate yourself through collective esteem and the relationship between your self-esteem and a culture is an important element of culture and how we come to develop and understand culture as well. Again, you think about something like a football team here at EOU, right? And you might think about how those elements could shape how you understand your participation. So collective self-esteem has what are known as 4 different parts. Private collective esteem is essentially your evaluation of the group. Do I like the team that I'm on? Do I like the church or organization that I'm a part of, right? How do I feel about this group? How am I evaluating this group? That's private collective esteem. Membership esteem is valuing yourself as a member of the group. Am I a good contributor to this project? Am I a good part of the group? Am I pulling my weight? That's the idea of membership. Public collective esteem is how non-members might evaluate or think about this group. Do people like our team? Do people know about our team? Do people go to our team's games, right? That would be an example of public collective esteem. And then importance to identity refers to the idea that being a member or part of a group is important to who you are. Is this culture or group or activity that I'm a part of crucial and incredibly important to me as a person? Or is it something that, I just kind of do on the side and I don't really put my identity into? So those are factors that we consider as we're evaluating and thinking about the cultures and groups that we're a member of, right? In fact, a lot of second-generation populations might have a very different relationship to their own cultural heritage that their parents might have. So I want you to think about and return to that definition and laying out a culture that you did, and take some time to think about how you evaluate your relationship to this culture. So take some time to think about your private collective esteem. How do you feel about this group? Do you feel that you are a good member? How do you evaluate your membership esteem? How do you consider something like public collective esteem? And how do you consider identity? How important is this culture or group to you? So we took some time today to talk about the importance of culture, the ways that we do culture through our performance and participation. We'll be talking a little bit more about measuring culture on Spectrum's next class. When you have finished your prompt for today, please pass it forward or email it to me. That'll be your ticket for the day. Have a great rest of your morning, and I'll see you again on Wednesday. Professor? Yeah.
I'm not sure what the rest of the group looked like for me.
Okay.
My mom had 2 students die in fire, so I was fired.
Oh my God.
She's an elementary principal. For trailers. It's terrible.
Where is this at?
Granville, back home.
Oh,
And
my God.
there's
Okay.
a lot more to the story.
Yeah.
She's a miss, so I don't.
Okay.
I'm gonna check on my stuff to coach what he thinks for missing wrestling.
Yeah.
Ideally, I'd leave Wednesday so I can finish some important wrestling things, so I don't miss on Friday,
Yeah.
but. Yeah, I don't know.
Is she doing okay?
She's okay. There's a lot of science about that.
Yeah.
This situation. And feel like she could have done more, but.
Yeah.
It's not her fault. But she's
Yeah.
kind of taking part of it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Tucker. That's horrible.
Yeah, it's okay, but.
yeah.
It's like a first and fourth grade. Thing, and
Yeah.
There's an older sister in the ICU because she went upstairs to try to save him and bring fire. Yeah. So.
Well, family is incredibly important.
Yeah,
You know,
and
your
being there would help her, I think.
of course, your top priority is do what you can for her.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see what coach thinks about me. I just have to miss practice Friday and Thursday and Friday, but.
yeah, that is
I think
no
he should
problem.
respect me.
Yeah, and you know, if you decide you'd like to join remotely.
I will.
Yeah,
Because there's
yeah.
nothing I can do during the school.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Josh. Oh, thanks. I wanted to go fall basic.